There are moments in life when we believe we have found refuge, a safe place where we can rebuild ourselves after everything falls apart. But sometimes, that refuge becomes a silent prison, where each day brings new wounds that nobody else can see. This is a story about dignity, silence, and the moment when truth finally comes to light. Before we begin this story, do not forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you are listening to this story from. We will post new stories every day. My name is Margaret, and I am 65 years old. For most of my life, I believed I understood what it meant to be strong. I raised my son David alone after his father left us when David was only 7 years old. I worked 2 jobs to put food on the table, to pay for his education, to make sure he had everything he needed. I sacrificed my own dreams so he could chase his, and I never regretted a single moment of it. When David grew up and became a successful architect in Portland, Oregon, I felt a quiet pride that only a mother can understand. He met Jessica when he was 32, and they married within a year. She was beautiful, polished, always dressed perfectly, always smiling. At their wedding, she hugged me and called me Mom. I thought I had gained not just my daughter-in-law, but a daughter. For years, I lived independently in my small apartment across town. I had my routine, my friends, my little garden on the balcony where I grew tomatoes and herbs. Life was simple, but it was mine. Then, 2 years ago, everything changed. I lost my job at the bookstore where I had worked for 15 years. The owner retired and closed the shop. At 63, finding new employment proved impossible. Employers would smile politely during interviews, but I could see it in their eyes. Too old, too slow, not worth the investment. My savings dwindled quickly. The rent became impossible to manage. I started skipping meals to save money. I stopped turning on the heat even during the coldest Portland winter nights. I did not want to burden David. He had his own life, his own responsibilities. But when I received the notice that I would be removed from my apartment within 30 days, I had no choice. I called him, my voice shaking, trying to sound casual as I explained my situation. He did not hesitate for even a second. He insisted I move in with him and Jessica immediately. He said they had plenty of space in their large house in the West Hills neighborhood. He said I was family, that I would never be a burden. His words brought tears to my eyes. I felt so grateful, so relieved. The day I moved in, David carried my boxes up to the guest room himself. It was a beautiful room with large windows overlooking the garden. Jessica stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching silently. When David left to get more boxes from the car, she stepped closer to me. Her smile was gone. Her voice was cold. She told me this was temporary. She told me I needed to find a way to contribute, or find somewhere else to go. She told me she did not appreciate having her space invaded. Then she turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, stunned and hurt. That night at dinner, Jessica was warm and cheerful, laughing at David's jokes, asking me questions about my day. I thought perhaps I had misunderstood her earlier. Perhaps she was just stressed. Perhaps everything would be fine. But the next morning, when David left for work, everything changed. I woke up around 7:30 and went downstairs to make myself a cup of coffee. Jessica was already in the kitchen, dressed in her yoga clothes, scrolling through her phone. When she saw me, her expression hardened. She asked me what I was doing. I said I was just making coffee. She told me that from now on, I should wait until she finished her morning routine before coming into the kitchen. She said her schedule was very important and she needed her space. I apologized and turned to leave, but she called me back. She handed me a list. It was a list of chores: cleaning the bathrooms, doing the laundry, vacuuming the entire house, preparing dinner. She said since I was living there without paying rent, the least I could do was help around the house. Her tone made it clear this was not a request. I looked at the list and felt something crack inside me, but I said nothing. I took the list and nodded. For the next few weeks, I became invisible. Every morning, David would kiss me on the forehead before leaving for work, telling me to rest, to take care of myself, to treat the house as my own home. The moment his car pulled out of the driveway, Jessica would appear with new demands. She criticized everything I did. The bathroom was not clean enough. The laundry was not folded correctly. The dinner was too salty or too bland. She would make me redo tasks multiple times until they met her standards. She never raised her voice. She never yelled. Her cruelty was delivered in calm, measured tones that somehow made it worse. One morning, about a month after I moved in, I was folding laundry in the utility room when Jessica walked in. She watched me for a moment, then picked up one of David's shirts that I had just folded. She unfolded it, dropped it on the floor, and stepped on it with her shoe. She told me to do it again. She told me I was sloppy and careless. She told me that if I could not do simple tasks properly, perhaps I should consider moving to a care facility for people who could no longer take care of themselves. I bent down and picked up the shirt. My hands were shaking. I refolded it while she watched, her arms crossed, her face expressionless. When I finished, she nodded and walked away without another word. That night, David asked me how I was settling in. Jessica was sitting right there at the dinner table, smiling sweetly. I looked at her, then at my son. I saw the love in his eyes, the genuine concern. I thought about the life he had built, the happiness he deserved. I thought about how much he had already done for me. I smiled and told him everything. It was wonderful. I told him Jessica was taking such good care of me. I watched Jessica's smile widen just slightly. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. She told David that I was such a help around the house, that she did not know what she would do without me. David beamed with happiness. He said he was so glad we were getting along so well. After dinner, as I was washing dishes, Jessica came up beside me. She leaned in, close, and whispered in my ear. She told me I was a smart woman. She told me to keep my mouth shut if I knew what was good for me. She told me that if I ever said anything to David, she would make sure I regretted it. Then she walked away, her footsteps light and cheerful. The weeks turned into months. The humiliations became daily occurrences. She would hide my reading glasses and then accuse me of being forgetful and senile. She would move my personal belongings from my room and then act surprised when I could not find them. She would eat the small portions of food I set aside for myself and then suggest I was eating too much and needed to watch my weight. One afternoon, I was in the garden, tending to the small herb section I had started. It was the only place where I felt some peace, where I could pretend, for just a few minutes, that I still had control over some small part of my life. Jessica came outside and stood watching me. Then she walked over and pulled up all the basil plants I had just planted, roots and all. She told me the garden was her domain. She told me I had no right to touch anything without her permission. She told me to clean up the mess I had made. Then she went back inside. I knelt there in the dirt, surrounded by the destroyed plants, and I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. I felt utterly defeated. I felt like I had disappeared, like I no longer existed as a person. I was just an inconvenience, a burden, something to be tolerated and controlled. But I could not leave. I had nowhere to go. I had no money. I had no options. So I stayed, and I endured, and I remained silent. David never suspected anything. Jessica was always careful. She was always warm and loving when he was around. She would bring me tea and ask about my day. She would compliment my cooking in front of him. She played her role perfectly, and I played mine. At night, I would lie in my bed and stare at the ceiling, wondering how my life had come to this. I wondered when I had become so weak, so powerless. I wondered if I deserved this somehow, if this was payment for some failure I did not recognize. One evening, about 4 months after I moved in, Jessica told me she was having friends over for dinner the next day. She told me I needed to stay in my room the entire time. She said her friends did not need to know there was an old woman living in the house. She said it would be embarrassing for everyone. I agreed. Of course I agreed. What else could I do? The next day, I stayed upstairs in my room while I heard laughter and conversation floating up from below. I smelled the food, had spent all morning preparing. I heard Jessica being complimented on her cooking. I heard her accept the praise graciously, never mentioning that I had done all the work. I sat on my bed and realized that I had become a ghost in my own son's house. I existed only to serve, only to obey, only to remain unseen. The worst part was not what Jessica did to me. The worst part was that I let her do it. I chose silence over truth because I was afraid of being a burden, afraid of destroying my son's happiness, afraid of having nowhere else to go. But fear has a cost, and I was paying it every single day. The morning that everything changed started like any other. David left for work around 7:30. He had a big presentation at his firm and had been preparing for weeks. He kissed me goodbye and told me he would be home late. Jessica waited until his car disappeared down the street before she turned to me. She had a new list of tasks, longer than usual, more demanding than usual. She told me she was going out for the day and expected everything to be completed by the time she returned. She said she would inspect my work, and if anything was not perfect, there would be consequences. I took the list without a word. I had learned that resistance only made things worse. I spent the entire morning cleaning, scrubbing, organizing. My back ached. My knees hurt. But I kept going because I did not know what else to do. Around noon, I was in the kitchen, on my hands and knees, scrubbing the floor. Jessica had decided the tiles were not clean enough and had made me start over. I was so focused on my work that I did not hear the front door open. I did not hear the footsteps in the hallway. Then I heard a voice. David's voice. Shocked, angry, confused. He asked what was happening. He asked why I was on the floor. He asked where Jessica was. I looked up and saw my son standing in the doorway, his face pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. And in that moment, I realized that my silence had finally come to an end. I froze on the kitchen floor, the wet scrub brush still in my hand, dirty water pooled around my knees. My son stood in the doorway. His briefcase dropped at his feet, his face a mixture of confusion and growing alarm. For a moment, neither of us moved. The only sound was the dripping of water from the brush back into the bucket. David stepped into the kitchen, his dress shoes clicking against the tiles I had just spent an hour cleaning. He asked me again, his voice softer now but more insistent, why I was scrubbing the floor on my hands and knees. He asked if something had happened, if I was okay. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. 4 months of silence had trained me well. 4 months of swallowing my truth, of protecting his happiness, of choosing peace over honesty. The lies came automatically now, like a reflex I could not control. I told him I was just helping out. I told him I wanted to keep busy, that it made me feel useful. I forced a smile onto my face and started to stand up, but my knees protested painfully. David rushed forward and took my arm, helping me to my feet. His touch was gentle, concerned, and it nearly broke me. He looked at me closely, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in months. I saw his expression change as he noticed things he had been too busy to see before, the weight I had lost, the tiredness in my eyes, the way my hands trembled slightly, the worn, old clothes I wore every day because Jessica had told me not to waste water by doing laundry too frequently. He asked when I had last eaten. The question surprised me so much that I answered honestly. I told him I had breakfast early that morning, around 6. It was now past noon. He looked at the kitchen counter and noticed there were no signs of lunch preparation, no plate set aside for me. His jaw tightened. He asked where Jessica was. I told him. She had gone out shopping and would be back later. He pulled out his phone and checked the time, then looked confused. He said he thought I understood that I did not need to do heavy cleaning, that they had a cleaning service that came twice a week. He said I was supposed to be resting, recovering, taking time for myself. I did not know what to say to that. We had a cleaning service. Jessica had never mentioned that. She had me cleaning every single day, redoing tasks until they met her impossible standards. The realization must have shown on my face because David's expression darkened. He guided me to a chair at the kitchen table and told me to sit down. He said he was going to make me lunch. I protested, saying I could do it myself, that he had work to worry about. He told me his presentation had been rescheduled to next week, which was why he had come home early. He said work could wait. As he moved around the kitchen, making me a sandwich and heating up some soup, he asked me questions. Casual questions at first. How was I spending my days? What did I do for fun? Had I been getting out of the house? Had I reconnected with any of my old friends from across town? I answered carefully, trying to keep my responses vague. I told him I kept busy around the house. I said I had not had much time for socializing. Each answer seemed to trouble him more. He set the food in front of me and sat down across the table, watching me eat. The sandwich was turkey and cheese, simple but delicious. I realized I could not remember the last time someone had made food for me. David asked if Jessica and I had been getting along well. His tone was careful, probing. I felt my heart start to race. This was dangerous territory. I told him, yes, that Jessica was very kind to me. The lie tasted bitter in my mouth. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. He said that one of their neighbors, Mrs. Patterson, had mentioned seeing me outside pulling weeds in the rain last week. She had been concerned because I was not wearing a coat and seemed to be out there for hours. David had assumed Mrs. Patterson was mistaken about the timing, but now he wanted to know if it was true. I remembered that day clearly. Jessica had decided the garden beds needed to be completely cleared and replanted. It had started raining in the afternoon, but she had stood at the window watching me, making it clear I was not to stop until the job was finished. I had been soaked through, shivering, my fingers numb. When I finally came inside, she had made me leave my wet clothes in the garage and told me to take a cold shower so I would not track water through her clean house. I told David it must have been a different day. I told him I only worked in the garden when the weather was nice. Another lie. I was becoming so practiced at lying to my own son. But David was not stupid. He had built a successful career by paying attention to details, by noticing what others missed. He leaned back in his chair and studied me with the same focused intensity he probably used when reviewing architectural plans. He asked me directly if Jessica had been treating me well. The question hung in the air between us. This was my chance. This was the moment I could tell him everything. I could show him the list of chores Jessica had given me that morning. I could tell him about the cruel words, the constant criticism, the way she made me feel like I was nothing. I could finally stop pretending. But then I thought about his marriage. I thought about how much he loved Jessica, how happy he had been on their wedding day. I thought about how my words could destroy that happiness. I thought about how he might not even believe me. Jessica was so good at playing her role. Who would believe that the warm, loving wife he knew could be so cruel? I told him yes. I told him Jessica treated me very well. I told him I was grateful to both of them for taking me in. David looked at me for a long moment. I could see he did not entirely believe me, but he did not push further. He told me he wanted me to promise him something. He wanted me to tell him if I ever felt uncomfortable or if I ever needed anything. He said I was his mother, that I had sacrificed everything for him, and that he would do anything to make sure I was happy and safe. His words brought tears to my eyes. I nodded and promised him I would tell him if anything was wrong. Another lie to add to all the others. He stayed home for the rest of the afternoon, insisting I rest while he made some calls for work from his home office. Around 4, Jessica came home, loaded with shopping bags. She walked into the kitchen and stopped short when she saw David sitting at the table with his laptop. She asked what he was doing home so early. Her voice was bright and cheerful, but I saw the flash of concern in her eyes when she glanced at me. David explained about his rescheduled presentation. Jessica set down her bags and came over to kiss him, then turned to me with a warm smile. She asked if I had a nice day. She said she hoped I had not worked too hard. She told David that I was always insisting on helping around the house, even though she kept telling me to relax. Her performance was flawless. I almost believed it myself. That evening, David suggested we all watch a movie together. It had been months since we had done anything as a family. Jessica agreed enthusiastically. We settled in the living room, and for a few hours, I almost felt like things were normal. Jessica sat close to David on the couch, her hand in his. She laughed at the funny parts of the movie. She asked me if I needed anything, a blanket or some tea. She was the perfect daughter-in-law. But when David went to the bathroom during a commercial break, Jessica leaned toward me. Her smile never faltered, but her voice was ice. She told me that was a close call. She told me I had better not let it happen again. She told me that if David ever came home early again and found me doing chores, I should say I chose to do them on my own, that I enjoyed feeling helpful. She told me she would be watching me very carefully from now on. When David returned, Jessica was laughing at something on the television, acting as if nothing had happened. I sat there, my body rigid, my heart pounding, realizing that things were going to get worse. Jessica now knew that David was becoming suspicious. She would be more careful, more controlling. The cage I was living in was about to become even smaller. The next morning, David left for work at his usual time. The moment his car disappeared, Jessica was at my bedroom door. She did not knock. She walked right in and handed me a new list. It was longer than ever before. She told me I had embarrassed her yesterday. She told me I had made her look bad in front of her husband. She told me I would pay for that. She informed me that from now on, I would wake up at 5 in the morning to prepare breakfast for David before he left for work. She said I would be responsible for all the cooking, all the cleaning, all the laundry. She said the cleaning service would no longer be coming. She had canceled them. She said since I apparently enjoyed cleaning so much, I could do it all myself. She also told me I was no longer allowed to eat meals with them. She said I would eat in my room after they had finished. She said I was not to come downstairs when David was home unless specifically invited. She said I was making her home feel crowded and uncomfortable. I listened to all of this in silence. What could I say? Where could I go? I had no money, no job, no options. I was trapped, and Jessica knew it. She smiled at me, that cold, triumphant smile, and left my room, closing the door behind her. The following weeks were the hardest of my life. I would wake up before dawn, exhausted from restless sleep, and prepare elaborate breakfast for David while Jessica slept. When David left for work, I would spend the entire day cleaning a house that never seemed to get clean enough for Jessica's standards. I would cook dinner and then retreat to my room while they ate together. Later, Jessica would bring me whatever leftovers remained, usually cold and unappetizing. David noticed I was not joining them for meals. Jessica told him I preferred to eat alone, that I found dinner conversation tiring at my age. She said it with such concern in her voice that David actually apologized to me for not realizing I needed more quiet time. I told him it was fine. I told him Jessica was just looking out for me. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after David had come home early, I was vacuuming the upstairs hallway when I heard voices downstairs. Jessica was on the phone with someone, probably one of her friends. I could not hear everything, but I heard her laugh and say something about having a live-in maid who worked for free. She said something about how convenient it was. She said something about how I was so grateful for a place to stay that I would do anything she asked. I stood there in the hallway, the vacuum still running, and I felt something shift inside me. It was not anger exactly. It was not even hurt anymore. It was something colder, something harder. It was the realization that Jessica did not just dislike me. She actually enjoyed humiliating me. She enjoyed having power over me. She enjoyed watching me submit to her cruelty. That night, I lay in bed and thought about my life. I thought about the strong woman I used to be, the woman who had raised a son alone, the woman who had worked 2 jobs without complaining, the woman who had always stood up for herself and for others. I wondered where that woman had gone. I wondered if she was still somewhere inside me, buried under months of fear and exhaustion and defeat. I thought about my son. I thought about how much I loved him, how proud I was of the man he had become, but I also thought about how my silence was not protecting him. It was deceiving him. I was letting him believe. His marriage was built on love and respect, when it was actually built on cruelty and lies. Was that really better? Was that really what a good mother would do? I did not have answers to these questions, but for the first time in months, I was asking them, and that felt like something. It felt like a beginning. The next morning, I woke at 5 as required and went downstairs to make breakfast. Jessica appeared in the kitchen around 6:30, already dressed in her exercise clothes. She watched me cook without saying a word. When David came down at 7, she became warm and affectionate again, kissing him good morning, asking about his plans for the day. David noticed the elaborate breakfast spread and thanked me. He said I did not need to go to so much trouble. Jessica quickly interjected, saying I had insisted that cooking made me happy. David smiled at me, clearly pleased that I was finding ways to enjoy myself. I smiled back and said nothing. After David left, Jessica told me she would be out most of the day at a spa appointment with friends. She gave me my list of chores and reminded me that she would inspect everything when she returned. She said if anything was not perfect, I would not be eating dinner that night. Then she left. I stood in the empty kitchen and looked at the list. 23 separate tasks. Some of them would take hours. Some of them I had already done yesterday. Jessica was making me redo them simply because she could. I thought about my options. I could do everything on the list and hope it met her standards. I could refuse and face whatever punishment she had in mind. Or I could finally tell my son the truth. The problem was, I had been lying for so long. How could I suddenly tell David that everything I had said for the past 4 months was false? How could I admit that I had been deceiving him, protecting him from a truth he needed to know? Would he believe me? Or would he think I was just a bitter old woman trying to cause problems in his marriage? I spent the day cleaning, but my mind was elsewhere. I kept rehearsing conversations in my head, imagining different ways to tell David what had been happening. Each scenario ended badly. Either he did not believe me, or he confronted Jessica and she denied everything, or their marriage fell apart, and he blamed me for destroying his happiness. By the time Jessica came home that evening, I had completed most of the list, but not all of it. My body ached. My hands were red and raw from cleaning products. I had not eaten lunch because I had been too focused on getting everything done. Jessica inspected my work with her usual critical eye. She found fault with almost everything. The mirrors were not streak-free. The floors had footprints. The laundry was not folded to her specifications. She told me I was getting sloppy. She told me I was worthless. She told me I was lucky she did not throw me out on the street. Then she told me I would not be eating dinner. She said perhaps hunger would motivate me to do better tomorrow. She went upstairs to change for dinner with David, leaving me standing in the living room, exhausted and defeated once again. That night, I lay in bed listening to the sounds of David and Jessica having dinner downstairs. I heard their laughter. I heard the gentle murmur of conversation. I heard the life they were living while I starved in a room above their heads. And I made a decision. I could not keep living like this. Something had to change, even if it meant risking everything. Even if it meant David might not believe me. Even if it meant I might end up with nowhere to go. I had to try. I had to find my voice again. But I never got the chance, because the very next day, David came home early again. And this time, what he witnessed left no room for doubt, no room for lies, no room for Jessica to pretend anymore. This time, the truth could not be hidden. A pause in the story to ask you, are you enjoying this account so far? Do not forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. We will post new stories every day. Thank you. Let us continue. The morning started like so many others had over the past months. I woke before dawn, my body protesting every movement. The hunger from missing dinner the night before gnawed at my stomach, but I had learned to ignore it. I had learned to ignore many things. I went downstairs in the darkness, moving quietly so as not to wake Jessica. The kitchen was cold. I turned on only the small light above the stove, not wanting to draw attention to myself. I began preparing breakfast for David, moving through the motions automatically. Scrambled eggs, toast, fresh fruit, coffee. The routine was so familiar now that I barely had to think about it. Around 6:30, I heard movement upstairs. Jessica was awake. My stomach tightened with anxiety, wondering what mood she would be in today, what new humiliation she had planned. I focused on the eggs, stirring them carefully, making sure they were exactly the way David liked them. Jessica appeared in the doorway wearing her silk robe, her arms crossed, watching me. She did not say good morning. She never did when we were alone. She walked over to the counter and picked up a piece of the toast I had just made. She examined it closely, then dropped it in the trash. She told me it was too dark. She told me to make more. She told me I was incompetent, that I could not even manage simple toast. I apologized quietly and put more bread in the toaster. My hands were shaking slightly, from hunger and exhaustion, and the constant stress of trying to avoid her anger. When David came downstairs at 7, the transformation was instant. Jessica's face lit up with warmth. She greeted him with a kiss and asked how he had slept. She complimented the breakfast, telling him how lucky he was to have someone who cared enough to cook for him every morning. David smiled at me gratefully and said he knew how fortunate he was. I watched this performance with a familiar sense of unreality. How could she switch so easily between cruelty and kindness? How? Could my son not see through it? But then, why would he? He had no reason to suspect that his wife was anything other than what she appeared to be, and I had spent months reinforcing that illusion with my silence. After David left for work, Jessica handed me the daily list. It was even longer than yesterday's. She told me she was having friends over for lunch and expected the house to be spotless. She told me I needed to prepare food for 6 people. She gave me a menu she had written out with specific dishes, appetizers, main courses, desserts. It would take hours to prepare everything. She also told me I was to stay completely out of sight once her friends arrived. She said I was to remain in my room with the door closed. She said she did not want her friends to see me or know I was there. She said the thought of them knowing she had her husband's mother living with her was mortifying. I took the list without speaking. What was there to say? I had long since stopped trying to reason with her or defend myself. It only made things worse. Jessica left to get ready, and I began working. I cleaned the bathrooms until they sparkled. I vacuumed every room. I dusted furniture, cleaned windows, organized closets. Then I moved to the kitchen and started on the food preparation. Appetizers first, small, pastries with different fillings that had to be assembled by hand. Then a complicated salad with ingredients that needed to be chopped precisely. Then a main course that required multiple steps and perfect timing. By 11 in the morning, I had been working for 6 hours straight without stopping. My back ached terribly. My feet were swollen. The hunger was making me dizzy, but I kept going because I knew Jessica would inspect everything. And I knew what would happen if anything was wrong. Around 11:30, Jessica came downstairs dressed beautifully in an elegant outfit, her makeup perfect, her hair styled. She walked through the house, examining my work with her critical eye. She ran her finger along surfaces looking for dust. She checked corners and baseboards. She opened cabinets to see if they were organized properly. In the kitchen, she tasted each dish I had prepared. She made faces and complained. She said the pastries were too dry. She said the salad dressing was too tangy. She said the main course needed more seasoning. She told me to fix everything. Her friends would be arriving in less than an hour. I worked frantically to adjust the dishes according to her demands, my hands moving quickly despite my exhaustion. Jessica stood there watching me, occasionally making critical comments, and never offering to help. When I finally finished, she told me to go upstairs and stay in my room. She said if I made any noise or came out for any reason, she would make me regret it. I went upstairs and closed my door. I could hear the doorbell ring a few minutes later, hear the cheerful greetings, hear the laughter and conversation as Jessica welcomed her friends. I heard them complimenting the house, complimenting the food. I heard Jessica accepting their praise, talking about how much work she had put into preparing everything, how she loved entertaining. I sat on my bed, listening to them enjoy the food I had spent hours making, and I felt something inside me break just a little bit more. I was not even angry anymore. I was just tired, so very tired of being invisible, of being nothing, of being a ghost in my own son's house. The lunch went on for hours. I could hear them in the living room, their voices floating up through the vents. They talked about shopping, about vacations, about their personal trainers and their yoga classes. They talked about their perfect lives, and Jessica was right there with them, one of them, belonging to their world in a way I never could. Around 3 in the afternoon, I heard them finally leaving. I heard the goodbyes, the promises to do this again soon, the compliments on what a wonderful hostess Jessica was. Then I heard the front door close, and silence fell over the house. I waited, knowing Jessica would come for me soon. Sure enough, within minutes, I heard her footsteps on the stairs. She opened my door without knocking and told me to come downstairs. There was a mess to clean up. I followed her down to find the living room and dining room in disarray, plates and glasses everywhere, food spilled on the table, napkins scattered across the floor. It looked like a storm had passed through. Jessica told me to clean all of it. She told me she was going out for the rest of the afternoon and expected everything to be spotless when she returned. Then she said something that made my blood turn cold. She told me she knew I had been in my room listening. She said she could imagine how pathetic I must have felt, hearing her. Friends praise her for work I had done. She said that was exactly where I belonged, hidden away, invisible, useful only for the work I could provide. She said I should be grateful she allowed me to stay at all. She left, and I stood there in the destroyed living room, surrounded by the remnants of a lunch party I had created but could not attend, and I realized something important. Jessica did not just want me to serve her. She wanted me to know my place. She wanted me to feel worthless. She wanted to break me completely. But even as I thought this, even as I felt the weight of her cruelty pressing down on me, something strange happened. Instead of feeling more defeated, I felt something else stirring. It was small and fragile, but it was there. It was resistance. It was the memory of who I used to be. It was a tiny spark of anger that I had been suppressing for months. I started cleaning up the mess, but my mind was elsewhere. I was thinking about my son. I was thinking about how much longer I could keep lying to him. I was thinking about whether staying silent was really protecting him or just protecting Jessica. I was thinking about what would happen if I finally told the truth. The afternoon passed slowly. I cleaned and organized, my body moving automatically while my thoughts churned. By the time Jessica returned around 6, everything was spotless. She inspected my work and, for once, found nothing to complain about. She told me I could eat the leftovers from the lunch party for dinner. It was the first food she had offered me in 2 days. I took the leftovers to my room and ate them cold, sitting on my bed. They were delicious, these dishes I had made with my own hands, but they tasted like ashes in my mouth. I thought about Jessica downstairs, probably texting her friends about what a successful party it had been. I thought about David at work, believing his wife was kind and his mother was happy. I thought about the web of lies that had become my life. That night, I could not sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around me. Around midnight, I heard David come home. I heard him and Jessica talking softly. Downstairs, heard them come up to bed. I heard their door close, and then silence. I thought about going to David right then, knocking on his door, telling him everything, but I could not move. The fear was too strong. The habit of silence was too ingrained. I told myself I would tell him tomorrow, or the next day, or the day after that. The same promises I had been making to myself for months. The next morning followed the same pattern. Wake before dawn, prepare breakfast, endure Jessica's criticism, pretend everything was fine when David was present, accept the list of chores, work until exhaustion. The routine had become so automatic that I barely thought about it anymore. But something was different today. David seemed distracted at breakfast. He kept looking at his phone, frowning slightly. Jessica asked him if everything was okay at work. He said yes, but he seemed preoccupied. When he left, he kissed me on the forehead and told me to take care of myself. I watched him go and felt a pang of guilt for all the lies I had told him. Jessica gave me my assignments for the day and left for her morning workout class. I began working, but I could not shake a strange feeling of tension in the air, like something was about to happen. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was just my exhaustion making me imagine things. Around 10 in the morning, I was in the downstairs bathroom, scrubbing the floor on my hands and knees. Jessica had decided it was not clean enough and had made me redo it 3 times already. My knees were painful from kneeling on the hard tiles. My hands were raw from the harsh cleaning chemicals. I was so focused on my work that I did not hear the front door open. I did not hear footsteps in the hallway. I did not know anyone was there until I heard Jessica's voice right behind me, sharp and angry. She asked what I thought I was doing. She said I was doing it all wrong. She said I was the most useless, incompetent person she had ever met. I tried to explain that I was doing exactly what she had told me to do, but she cut me off. She told me to shut up. She told me she was tired of my excuses. She told me that if I could not do simple tasks properly, maybe it was time for me to leave. Maybe it was time for me to find out what it was like to be on the streets with nowhere to go. Her voice was getting louder, more aggressive. She was standing over me while I knelt on the floor, and she was enjoying it. I could see it in her eyes. She was enjoying my helplessness, my humiliation. She raised her voice even more, telling me I was a burden, that I was ruining her life, that she wished David had never brought me here. And then I heard another voice, a voice that made my heart stop, a voice filled with shock and disbelief and growing fury. David asked what was going on. He asked why Jessica was yelling at me. He asked why I was on the floor. I looked up and saw my son standing in the bathroom doorway. He was supposed to be at work. He was not supposed to be here. But there he was, and his face was pale with shock. He had heard everything. He had seen everything. Jessica froze. For just a second, I saw panic flash across her face before she quickly composed herself. She turned to David with a bright smile and started to say something about how she was just trying to help me, how I had been insisting on cleaning even though she had told me not to. But David was not listening to her. He was looking at me, really looking at me, and I saw the moment when everything clicked into place for him. He saw the raw skin on my hands. He saw the exhaustion in my face. He saw the fear in my eyes. He saw the truth I had been hiding for months. He stepped into the bathroom and held out his hand to help me up. His voice was gentle when he spoke to me, but I could hear the anger underneath it. He told me to stand up. He told me we were going to talk. He told me he wanted the truth, all of it, right now. Jessica tried to interrupt, her voice still cheerful and light, but David turned to her, and the look on his face silenced her immediately. He told her not to say another word. He told her to go to the living room and wait. His voice was cold in a way I had never heard before. Jessica's mask slipped completely. Her face twisted with anger and fear. She started to argue, to explain, to justify. But David simply repeated himself. He told her to go to the living room and wait. He said they would talk after he spoke with me. Jessica looked at me with pure hatred in her eyes. She looked like she wanted to say something, to threaten me one more time. But then she turned and walked out of the bathroom. I heard her footsteps going down the hallway, heard her enter the living room. David helped me to my feet. My legs were shaking so badly I could barely stand. He put his arm around me to steady me and asked if I was hurt. I told him I was fine, but my voice broke on the words. He led me to the kitchen and made me sit down at the table. Then he sat across from me, took my damaged hands in his, and asked me to tell him everything. He asked me to please, finally, tell him the truth. And looking into my son's eyes, seeing the concern and love and pain there, I realized I could not lie anymore. The time for silence was over. The time for truth had finally come, whether I was ready for it or not. I sat at the kitchen table, my hands still trembling in David's gentle grip. The words were there, waiting to be spoken, but they felt stuck in my throat. 4 months of silence, 4 months of lies, 4 months of protecting a truth that should never have been hidden. How do you begin to unravel all of that? David waited patiently. He did not rush me. He just held my hands and looked at me with those kind eyes. The same eyes that used to look up at me when he was a little boy asking me to read him a bedtime story. I thought about that little boy, about how I had protected him from every hurt I could, about how I had promised myself I would always keep him safe. But somewhere along the way, I had confused protection with deception. I had thought that hiding the truth was the same as preserving his happiness. Now, looking at the pain and confusion in his face, I realized how wrong I had been. I started talking, slowly at first, my voice barely above a whisper. I told him about the first day I moved in, about the moment Jessica's warmth had vanished the second he left the room. I told him about the lists of chores, about the constant criticism, about the way she made me redo tasks over and over until they met her impossible standards. David listened without interrupting, but I could see his expression changing. The confusion was giving way to understanding, and the understanding was giving way to anger. Not anger at me, but anger at what had been done to me. I saw his jaw tighten, saw his hands grip mine more firmly, as if he was trying to anchor me while I told my story. I told him about being forbidden from eating meals with them, about how I had to stay in my room when he was home unless specifically invited down. I told him about the garden incident, about how Jessica had destroyed the plants I had carefully tended. I told him about cleaning in the rain while she watched from the window, about going without meals as punishment when my work was not perfect enough. With each revelation, I watched something break in my son's eyes. He had built his life with this woman. He had trusted her. He had believed her when she told him I was happy, that I was adjusting well, that everything was wonderful. And all the while, in his own home, under his own roof, I had been suffering in silence. When I told him about the lunch party, about preparing all the food and then being forced to hide in my room while Jessica took credit for everything, David's face went pale. He let go of my hands and stood up, pacing to the window, his back to me. I could see his shoulders shaking slightly. I did not know if it was from anger or from trying not to cry. He asked me why. His voice was rough, strained. He asked why I had not told him. He asked how I could have let this go on for so long. I tried to explain. I told him I did not want to be a burden. I told him I was afraid he would not believe me, that Jessica was so good at pretending, so convincing in her warmth when he was around. I told him I was terrified of causing problems in his marriage, of being the reason his happiness fell apart. I told him I had nowhere else to go, no money, no options. But even as I said these things, they sounded weak to my own ears. They were reasons, yes, but they were also excuses. The truth was simpler and more painful. I had been afraid, and ashamed and so beaten down that I had lost sight of my own worth, of my own right to be treated with dignity and respect. David turned back to face me. His eyes were wet, but his expression was determined. He told me he was sorry. He told me he should have seen it, should have paid more attention, should have noticed the signs. He told me he had failed me as a son, that his job was to protect me just as I had protected him his whole life, and he had not done that. I started to protest, to tell him it was not his fault, but he shook his head firmly. He said part of it was his fault. He said he had been so wrapped up in his work, so trusting of Jessica, so willing to believe everything was fine that he had not looked closely enough. He said he would have to live with that, but right now, what mattered was making things right. He told me to stay in the kitchen. He told me he was going to talk to Jessica. I felt a surge of panic and started to stand, worried about what would happen. But he gently pushed me back into the chair. He told me this conversation was long overdue. He told me I did not need to be afraid anymore. He told me he would handle this. Then he left the kitchen, and I heard his footsteps going toward the living room where Jessica was waiting. I sat alone at the table, my heart pounding, listening to the voices that began to rise from the other room. At first, I could not make out words, just the sound of David's voice, low and controlled, and Jessica's voice, higher and defensive. Then the voices got louder. I heard Jessica denying everything, her tone incredulous, as if she could not believe David would accuse her of such things. I heard her say I was confused, that I was old and forgetful, that I had misunderstood her intentions. I heard David's voice rise in response. He was not yelling, but his words were sharp and clear. He told Jessica he had seen me on my hands and knees scrubbing the floor. He told her he had heard her yelling at me, calling me useless and incompetent. He told her those were not the actions of someone who was being misunderstood. Jessica's voice changed then. The pretense of innocence fell away, and I heard anger creep into her tone. She told David that I was a burden. She said she had never wanted me living there in the first place. She said I made her uncomfortable in her own home, that she felt invaded and suffocated by my presence. She said she had every right to ask me to help around the house since I was not paying rent. I heard David respond, his voice getting colder. He told Jessica there was a difference between asking someone to help and treating them like a servant. He told her there was a difference between setting boundaries and engaging in deliberate cruelty. He told her he could not believe the woman he married was capable of treating another human being, especially his mother, with such contempt. The argument continued. Jessica tried different approaches. She tried to justify her behavior, saying I had brought it on myself by being difficult and stubborn. She tried to minimize it, saying she had only been trying to maintain standards in her home. She tried to deflect, saying David was overreacting, that he was taking my word over hers without considering that I might be exaggerating or lying. But David was not backing down. I had never heard him like this before. So firm and unwavering. He told Jessica that even if everything she said was true, even if I had been difficult or stubborn, nothing justified the way she had treated me. He said basic human decency required treating people with respect, especially elderly people, especially family members. Then Jessica made a mistake. Her voice turned cold and sharp, and I heard her say something that changed everything. She told David he had to choose. She said either I left or she would leave. She said she could not live in a house where she was accused of being cruel and where her husband believed an old woman over his own wife. She said if he really loved her, he would support her and send me away. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. I held my breath, waiting for David's response, terrified of what he might say. Part of me wanted to run into the living room and tell him it was fine, that I would leave, that he did not need to choose. But I stayed in my chair, frozen, waiting, when David finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but absolutely certain. He told Jessica that she was right about one thing. He did have to choose, and he chose his mother. He told her that the woman he married would never have treated someone the way she had treated me. He told her he did not recognize her anymore. He told her their marriage was based on trust and love, and she had shattered both of those things. He told her she needed to leave. I heard Jessica gasp, She started talking rapidly, her voice rising to near hysteria. She told him he could not be serious. She told him he was throwing away their marriage over an old woman who had nowhere else to go. She told him he was being manipulated, that I had been planning this all along, that I wanted to drive them apart. David did not argue with her. He just repeated himself. He told her to pack a bag and leave. He told her they could discuss what happened next, once they had both had time to think. But right now, he needed her out of the house. He told her she had destroyed any trust he had in her, and he could not look at her without feeling disgusted by what she had done. The next sounds I heard were Jessica's footsteps storming up the stairs. I heard drawers slamming, heard the sounds of her moving around their bedroom. I heard her come back downstairs, heard her say something to David in a voice too low for me to understand. Then I heard the front door open and slam shut with such force that the whole house seemed to shake. Then silence. I sat in the kitchen, still too stunned to move, trying to process what had just happened. David had chosen me. He had stood up for me. He had sent Jessica away. Part of me felt overwhelming relief and gratitude, but another part felt crushing guilt. I had destroyed his marriage. I had ruined his happiness. Everything I had tried to prevent by staying silent had happened anyway. David appeared in the kitchen doorway. His face was pale and drawn. He looked like he had aged 10 years in the last hour. He came over to me and knelt down beside my chair, taking my hands again. He told me Jessica was gone. He told me she would stay with her sister while they figured things out. He told me I was safe now, that nobody would hurt me or humiliate me ever again. Then, to my shock, my strong, successful, confident son put his head in my lap and started to cry. His shoulders shook with sobs, and I felt his tears soaking through my worn clothes. I put my hand on his head, stroking his hair the way I used to when he was little, and had scraped his knee or had a bad dream. I told him I was sorry. I told him I never wanted this to happen, that I had tried so hard to protect him from it. But he lifted his head and looked at me with red eyes and told me I had nothing to apologize for. He said he was the one who was sorry. He was sorry he had not seen what was happening. He was sorry he had brought someone into his life who was capable of such cruelty. He was sorry I had suffered in silence for so long because I was trying to protect him. We sat there together in the kitchen for a long time, neither of us speaking, both of us trying to process the magnitude of what had just occurred. The house felt different now. It felt quieter, emptier, but also somehow lighter. The weight of secrecy and lies had been lifted, even if it had been replaced by uncertainty and pain. Eventually, David stood up and told me he was going to make us both some tea. As he moved around the kitchen, I watched him and realized something important. He was not broken. He was hurt. Yes. He was angry and confused and disappointed, but he was not broken. He was dealing with it, taking action, making decisions. He was being strong in the way I had taught him to be strong. While the tea was brewing, David told me his plans. He said I would stay in the house for as long as I wanted. He said this was my home now, truly my home, not a place where I was barely tolerated. He said we would convert the guest room into a proper suite for me, that we would make it comfortable and personal. He said I would never have to scrub floors or do anyone's laundry unless I chose to. He said I would be treated with the respect and dignity I deserved. He also told me he did not know what would happen with his marriage. He said he needed time to think, to process everything, to figure out if there was any way to repair what had been broken. He said he loved Jessica, or at least he had loved the person he thought she was, but he could not be married to someone capable of the cruelty she had shown. I told him I understood. I told him I would support whatever decision he made. I told him my only wish was for him to be happy and to be with someone who truly deserved him. We drank our tea in silence, both of us lost in our own thoughts. And at the afternoon sun was streaming through the kitchen windows, warm and golden. It was the same kitchen where I had spent months in fear and humiliation, but it felt different now. It felt like a place where healing might be possible. That evening, David ordered food from my favorite restaurant, a little Italian place I used to go to before I lost my job. We sat at the dining room table together, just the two of us, and had a real meal, a real conversation. We talked about my life before I moved in, about my friends I had lost touch with, about hobbies I used to enjoy. We talked about his work, about his dreams for the future, about things we had not discussed in months because there had never been space for real conversation. After dinner, David suggested we watch a movie together, something light and funny to take our minds off the heaviness of the day. We settled on the couch, and for the first time in 4 months, I felt like I could breathe. I felt like I was allowed to exist, to take up space, to be present. But even as we watched the movie, even as I felt the relief of being free from Jessica's cruelty, I could not shake a feeling of unease. Things had changed. Yes, the immediate danger was gone, but I knew this was not over. Jessica was not the type of person to accept defeat quietly. She was not the type to simply walk away without trying to salvage something, without trying to regain control. I did not say any of this to David. He had been through enough for one day, but I could not help wondering what would happen next, what Jessica's next move would be. I had spent 4 months learning to read her moods, learning to anticipate her cruelty, and my instincts were telling me that while this battle might be over, the war was far from won. That night, I lay in my bed, the same bed I had lain in for months feeling hopeless and defeated. But tonight felt different. I felt different. I had found my voice again. I had told the truth. My son knew what had happened, and he had stood by me. Yet I could not fully relax. I kept thinking about the look in Jessica's eyes when she had left, the fury and humiliation I had seen there. I kept thinking about how she had spent months systematically breaking me down, and how all of that had been exposed and undone in a single afternoon. People like Jessica did not simply accept that kind of defeat. They did not walk away quietly. They fought back. They looked for ways to reclaim their power, to reassert their control, and I had a terrible feeling that whatever came next would make the past 4 months seem almost easy by comparison. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, but my mind would not quiet. I kept seeing Jessica's face, kept hearing her voice, and somewhere in the darkness, I knew she was planning something. I knew she would come back, in one way or another. The question was not if, but when, and what form her revenge would take. For tonight, though, I was safe. For tonight, I was free. And for tonight, that would have to be enough. A pause in the story to remind you to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you are listening to this story from. We will post new stories every day. Thank you. Let us continue. The first 3 days after Jessica left were strangely peaceful. David took time off from work to stay home with me. We spent the time talking, really talking, in ways we had not done in years. He asked me about my dreams, about what I wanted to do with my life now that I was free from the constant fear and exhaustion. I told him I was not sure yet, that I needed time to remember who I was before all of this had happened. David was true to his word about making changes to the house. He hired someone to repaint my room in colors I chose, soft blues and greens that reminded me of the ocean. He took me shopping for new furniture, new bedding, new clothes to replace the worn things I had been wearing. He treated me not like a burden or a guest, but like someone who truly belonged. We established new routines together. We made breakfast together in the mornings, sharing the tasks and the conversation. We took walks in the neighborhood, and David introduced me to neighbors I had never been allowed to meet. We discovered a small bookstore cafe a few blocks away, and we started going there in the afternoons to read and drink coffee. I began to feel like myself again, like the strong woman I had been before everything fell apart. The constant tension that had lived in my shoulders for months started to ease. I could sleep through the night without waking in fear. I could walk through the house without feeling like I needed permission to exist. But Jessica's presence still lingered like a shadow. David received daily calls and messages from her, which he mostly ignored. When he did answer, the conversations were brief and cold. She wanted to come back. She wanted to talk. She insisted everything had been a misunderstanding, that she had been stressed and had not meant the things she said. She claimed I had twisted the truth to turn David against her. David did not believe her. He had seen enough with his own eyes, had heard enough with his own ears, but I could see the conflict in his face. Every time her name appeared on his phone, despite everything, he had loved her. Part of him still did, and letting go of that love, Accepting that the woman he married was not who he thought she was caused him pain. On the 4th day, Jessica showed up at the house. I was in the kitchen preparing lunch when I heard the doorbell ring. David answered it, and I heard Jessica's voice, sweet and pleading, asking if they could please talk. My body tensed immediately, old fears rising up despite my efforts to push them down. David told her this was not a good time. He told her they could meet somewhere neutral if she wanted to talk, but she was not welcome in the house right now. Jessica's voice changed then, becoming sharper. She said it was her house too. She said she had every right to be there. I heard David's response, calm but firm. He told her that legally, the house was in his name alone. He told her that after what she had done, she had forfeited any claim to this space. He told her again that if she wanted to talk, they could arrange a meeting elsewhere, but she needed to leave now. There was a moment of silence, and then I heard Jessica say something that made my blood run cold. She said she had been thinking about everything that had happened. She said maybe she had been too harsh with me, that maybe she should have handled things differently. But she also said that David needed to consider the whole picture. She said I had been manipulating him, playing the victim to drive them apart. She said she had evidence that I was not as innocent as I appeared. I stepped into the hallway, where I could see the front door. Jessica stood there, and when she saw me, her expression flickered between false sweetness and barely concealed hatred. She addressed me directly, her voice dripping with artificial concern. She asked how I was doing, if I was feeling better now that I had gotten what I wanted. Before I could respond, David stepped between us. He told Jessica her attempt to rewrite history would not work. He told her he knew exactly what had happened because he had witnessed it himself. He told her that trying to blame me for her own cruelty only proved she had not changed at all. Jessica's mask slipped completely then. Her face twisted with anger, and she told David he was a fool. She said I had been playing him from the beginning, that I had deliberately painted her as a villain to secure my place in his house. She said once I had what I wanted, I would bleed him dry financially and emotionally. She said he would regret choosing an old woman over his wife. The words were meant to hurt, to create doubt, to make David question his decision, but they had the opposite effect. I saw something shift in David's expression, a final piece of whatever affection he had left for Jessica disappearing. He told her she needed to hear herself, to hear how she spoke about another human being with such contempt. He told her the woman he married would never have said such things. He told her their marriage was over, not temporarily, not conditionally, but permanently. He told her he would have his lawyer contact her about the formal arrangements, but as far as he was concerned, they were done. He told her to leave and not come back. Jessica stared at him in shock. She had expected him to waver, to feel guilty, to be susceptible to her manipulation. She had not expected him to be so certain, so final. She opened her mouth to say something else, but David simply closed the door. We heard her standing on the other side for a moment, and then we heard her footsteps walking away. David turned to me, and I saw tears in his eyes. He told me he was sorry I had to hear all of that. I went to him and hugged him, this man who had once been my little boy, and who was now protecting me the way I had once protected him. I told him he had nothing to apologize for, that I was proud of him, that he had done the right thing, even though it hurt. That evening, as we sat together in the living room, David talked about his plans for the future. He said he wanted to help me get back on my feet properly. He had been thinking about it, and he wanted to set up a small fund for me so I would have financial independence. He said he wanted me to have the freedom to make my own choices, to live my own life, while knowing I always had a safe place with him. I protested at first, saying he had already done so much, but he insisted. He said it was not charity. He said it was what I deserved, what I should have had all along. He said everything I had done for him over the years, all the sacrifices I had made to give him a good life, this was just a fraction of what I had given him. Over the following weeks, things began to settle into a new normal. David filed for divorce. Jessica tried several more times to contact him, to convince him to change his mind, but each time he remained firm. Eventually, her attempts stopped. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard she had moved out of state to live with family. The house felt lighter without the shadow of her potential return. I reconnected with old friends I had lost touch with. I joined a book club at the local library. I started volunteering at the community center, helping to organize activities for other seniors. Slowly, I rebuilt a life that was mine, not defined by servitude or fear. David began dating again, cautiously at first. He told me he was taking his time, that he wanted to be sure about someone before bringing them into his life. I told him I supported whatever made him happy, but that I also understood his caution. He had learned a painful lesson about looking beneath the surface, about paying attention to how people treated others when they thought no one important was watching. One afternoon, about 3 months after Jessica left, David came home with someone he wanted me to meet. Her name was Rachel, and she was a colleague from his firm. She was warm and genuine, and when David introduced us, she shook my hand and told me she had heard so much about me. Not from David trying to explain the situation, but from David talking about his mother with obvious love and respect. We had dinner together that night, and I watched the way Rachel interacted with both of us. She asked me questions about my life, my interests, my volunteer work. She laughed at my stories. She treated me like a person, not an inconvenience or an obligation. When she helped clear the table after dinner, she did it naturally, without making a show of it, working alongside both David and me as equals. After she left, David asked me what I thought. I told him the truth. I told him Rachel seemed wonderful, but more importantly, I told him I trusted his judgment now. I told him he had proven he could stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult. I told him I knew he would never again allow someone into his life who did not treat people with kindness and respect. 6 months passed. The divorce was finalized. David and Rachel's relationship grew stronger, and eventually, she became a regular presence in our home. The difference between her and Jessica was like the difference between sunlight and shadow. Rachel never treated me as anything other than family. She asked my opinions, included me in plans, respected my space while also making me feel welcome in shared spaces. One evening, the 3 of us were having dinner together. When Rachel mentioned she had been talking to her mother about me, she said her mother was also widowed and living alone, struggling with some of the same challenges I had faced. She asked if I might be interested in meeting her, thought perhaps we might enjoy each other's company. I agreed, and the following week, Rachel brought her mother over for coffee. Her name was Patricia, and we discovered we had much in common. We both loved gardening, old movies, and mystery novels. We started meeting regularly for coffee and walks. She became a good friend, someone who understood the challenges of aging and loss without judgment or pity. Through Patricia, I met other women in similar situations. We formed our own small community of support, helping each other navigate everything from technology to healthcare to simple loneliness. I realized that I was not just rebuilding my own life. I was building something new and meaningful that I had never had before. David proposed to Rachel on a sunny afternoon in the garden. I had finally been allowed to restore and expand. She said yes immediately. When they told me, Rachel hugged me and said she hoped I would help her plan the wedding. She said she wanted my input and my presence, that I was family now. The wedding was small and beautiful, held in the garden I had helped create. I watched my son marry a woman who truly deserved him, a woman who treated everyone around her with genuine kindness. During the ceremony, David looked back at me and smiled, and I saw in his eyes not just love for his new wife, but gratitude and peace. At the reception, several people approached me to say how wonderful it was to see David so happy, and how they could tell Rachel and I had such a special relationship. One of David's colleagues mentioned that David often spoke about how close we were, how much he valued my wisdom and companionship. It was strange to hear, after spending so many months being told I was a burden, that I was valued and appreciated. That night, after the guests had left and Rachel and David had departed for their honeymoon, I sat in the quiet house and reflected on everything that had happened. The journey from that desperate phone call asking for help to this moment had been painful and difficult. I had lost myself for a while, had forgotten my own worth, had allowed fear to silence my voice, but I had also learned important lessons. I learned that protecting someone does not mean lying to them. I learned that love sometimes requires difficult truths. I learned that dignity is not something that can be taken away unless we surrender it ourselves. And I learned that it is never too late to find your voice again, to stand up for yourself, to reclaim your life. When David and Rachel returned from their honeymoon, They sat me down and said they had been talking. They wanted to officially convert part of the house into a separate suite for me, with my own entrance, my own small kitchen, my own space that was completely mine. They said they loved having me close, but wanted to make sure I had privacy and independence. I accepted gratefully. The renovations took a few months, and when they were complete, I had a beautiful space that felt like home. I could be part of the family when I wanted to be, and retreat to my own sanctuary when I needed solitude. It was the perfect balance. A year after Jessica left, I received an unexpected letter. It was from her, forwarded through David's lawyer. In it, she wrote that she had been in therapy and had come to realize how badly she had treated me. She said she was not making excuses, but she wanted me to know she recognized her behavior had been cruel and unacceptable. She said she hoped someday I might be able to forgive her, though she understood if I could not. The letter surprised me. I did not know if her change was genuine, or if this was another manipulation, but I realized it did not really matter. Whether or not Jessica had truly changed, whether or not she was genuinely sorry, was not my concern anymore. I had moved on. I had built a new life, a good life, a life where I was valued and respected. Her apology or lack thereof could not touch that. I wrote a brief response through the lawyer. I told her I hoped she found peace and healing. I told her I had forgiven her, not for her sake, but for my own, because holding on to anger and resentment would only hurt me. And then I put the letter away and returned to my life. Now, as I sit in my garden on a warm afternoon, watching David and Rachel play with their newborn daughter, my granddaughter, I marvel at how much can change in such a short time. 2 years ago, I was on my knees scrubbing a bathroom floor, believing I was worthless and alone. Today, I am surrounded by love, by purpose, by joy. My granddaughter is named Margaret, after me. When Rachel told me they had chosen that name, I cried. David said they wanted their daughter to carry the name of the strongest woman he knew, the woman who had taught him about resilience and courage, and standing up for what is right, even when it is difficult. I hold little Margaret in my arms, and I think about the stories I will tell her when she is old enough to understand. I will tell her about dignity and self-worth. I will tell her about finding your voice when silence becomes unbearable. I will tell her that it is never too late to change your life, to demand respect, to refuse to accept cruelty. I will tell her that we teach people how to treat us, and that accepting mistreatment in silence only enables more mistreatment. I will tell her that protecting someone by hiding the truth is not real protection at all. I will tell her that real love sometimes requires difficult conversations and painful honesty. But most importantly, I will tell her that she is strong, that she is worthy, that she deserves to be treated with kindness and respect always. And if anyone ever tries to make her feel small or worthless or invisible, she must find her voice and speak her truth, no matter how frightening that might be. The sun is setting now, painting the Portland sky in shades of orange and gold. David calls me in for dinner. Rachel has made my favorite meal. Little Margaret is sleeping peacefully in her bassinet. This is my family. This is my home. This is the life I fought to reclaim, and the life I will continue to cherish. I am 67 years old now. I have lived through loss and hardship and cruelty, but I have also lived through redemption and healing and love. My story did not end when I was on my knees scrubbing that bathroom floor. It was only beginning, and the chapters still being written are more beautiful than I ever could have imagined during those dark months of silence and suffering. As I walk inside to join my family for dinner, I take one last look at the garden, at the herbs and flowers I planted and tended, at the space that is mine, that I created, that represents my journey from invisibility to presence, from silence to voice, from despair to hope. And I smile, knowing that I am exactly where I am supposed to be, surrounded by people who love me, living a life of dignity and purpose and joy. The nightmare is over, the healing continues, and the future stretches out before me, full of possibility and promise. This is my story, this is my truth, and this is my victory.